I will find you, lizard. One day I will have you. Huh? Oh my goodness. Oh, why, hello there. Yes. Oh, you're here for the Vivarium build tutorial. Well, of course. Well, I won't keep you waiting. Cue the intro. Where are you, lizard? Why can't I ever find you? Huh? Oh, crap. Ah, so this is what you guys want, huh? A nice looking vivarium with a cool background, I mean, that's why you're here, right? What, you think you want this? You think you deserve this? Do you realize how much effort I put into this and you think you can just have it just like that, huh? What, you think you're better than me? Well, luckily for you, I am feeling generous, and I'm willing to share my secrets on how I created this vivarium. Well, it's not really a secret. Anyways, let's begin. There's a lot you're going to need, so let's get started. Some great stuff, expanding foam, some cutting tools and a measuring tape, this PVC pipe that I cut in half and added holes near the bottom. I will explain what this is used for later. Some bamboo skewers, some paint cups and a paintbrush, a drill with some wire brushes, very importantly, a Drylok bucket with mixing sticks and cement coloring of different colors, a bunch of outlet timers, a water container, some drainage mesh, a big container, a misting system like the Mist King misting system, cool mist humidifier, a hydrometer, a Python Pro gravel siphon, some soil like the bio bedding from Josh's Frogs, and some Zoo-Med Repti soil, some not so cheap leaf litter, a bucket filled with hydro balls, a whole bunch of wood, a strong light, and finally a vivarium. And the one I'm using is a medium extra tall Exoterra terrarium. That is 24 by 18 by 36. Perfect size for the lizard I want to get. The reason why I chose a Exoterra tank is because I think it looks really nice. And it has this awesome double door feature. Though, it would seem that one of my doors does not want to close properly. Like, what the f- Anyways, this list may or may not have included all the stuff that I end up using for the build. So, if I do end up using something later in the video and I didn't show it here, I just forgot to add it in. What? If you're not going to include all the items you used for the video, then what was the point of making this whole section? Well, don't listen to him. He's just having a bad day. Let's move on to the actual build. First things first, I have marked the 5-inch and 6.5 inch from the bottom of the terrarium. The 6.5 inch mark is to show me where the wood pieces should end, which means that there should be no wooden decoration under the 6.5 mark. And the 5-inch mark is to show me where the background should end, because everything under the 5-inch mark should be soil or substrate. Then I placed the whole terrarium laying on its back in a well-ventilated area. And this is where the magic starts. Oh, also I put the terrarium on some construction paper, you know, gotta be safe. Before commencing, make sure you are supporting the glass doors, because they can't open all the way back and will break if unsupported. That's why I'm using this chair and this stool to support the glass doors. I know, very prestigious. Now you can finally begin the background making process. First, you want to just add a simple single layer of great stuff expanding foam. After some time, this stuff can really expand. The background will be primarily made of this stuff, and it's actually pretty cool. You can do a lot with it, and I'll show you on how you can cut it up and decorate using this great stuff expanding foam. After the foam has fully cured, after around 8 hours, you want to start cutting it to try and get those naturalistic rock-like shapes. Trust me, it will look a lot nicer after we add some Drylok paint. Is it even paint? After we add some Drylok. But then I realized how long of a process it would be to cut all the foam by hand, so I said screw it and use the drill with a wire brush attached. It creates a very similar rock-like effect, but it does it so much faster. Then I go back using the cutting tools to cut the foam at the sides of the terrarium, where I was too afraid to use the drill in fear of scratching the side glass. Of course, you want to vacuum all of the loose pieces. Make sure you get them all, cause they can become such a pain during the painting phase. Now you can start adding the cork rounds, branches, and all that fun stuff. I am actually using the bamboo skewers to hold up some of the branches. It is actually very effective. The foam provides a lot of friction, which helps keep the wooden pieces up. Depending on what animal you're planning on keeping, this will influence what kind of background you're going to make. I am making this terrarium for an arboreal lizard species, which is why I am adding so many climbing branches. Once you're happy with whatever you have made, it is time to foam those pieces into place. Make sure you foam all the pieces to the background and to each other if needed. After the new foam has cured, you want to start cutting it down so that it would match with the background behind it. No more drilling though, not enough space for that. Vacuum up any loose pieces. Now it's time to apply the Drylok, which is waterproof, strong, and safe for reptiles. You also want to add at minimum of 3 layers of this stuff. In order to get the color you want, you're gonna have to mix the Drylok with some cement coloring. I am going for a stone look, so I mixed the Drylok with some red, brown, and black cement coloring. Also, just to note, you want to start by adding a little bit of this cement coloring, and I mean it. I thought I added a little bit of this charcoal black coloring on my first attempt, only to turn the entire mixture black. So with these cement colorings, start very, very small. After mixing, you can start adding it to the background. Make sure you don't miss a spot. Make sure you get it in every little crevice. Cause you don't want to finish painting only to find out much later that you missed a spot. This totally didn't happen to me before, no sir. Of course, alternate between different sized brushes if needed. This is how it looks like after you just added the Drylok. The paint becomes much darker when it's fully dried. I thought that first layer was way too dark, so I made the second layer a bit lighter. The nice thing about needing to have multiple layers is that you can always adjust the color each time you're unhappy with the previous layer. Don't forget to paint the foam connecting some of the wooden branches. For the third layer, I made it a lot lighter in order to get that nice stone gray look. After you're done with the final layer, you want to start creating depth by adding some dark Drylok and some light Drylok in necessary areas. I also added an extra thin layer before adding the dark and light Drylok, just so that the colors would mix together nicely. This is how it looks when it's fully dried. I think it looks quite nice. During this process, you're probably gonna get some Drylok on the side glass, but luckily, when the Drylok is fully dried, you can easily scrape off those pieces. And don't forget to vacuum any of those loose pieces, and I mean it. I will be watching. Close up the terrarium because you are finally done with the background. Now you can place it in its desired location, preferably on some kind of stand. Alright, so I am really happy with the background and I think it looks really nice. But I noticed some cracks in the Drylok, which don't look good at all. I guess I didn't add enough layers. So I added another layer using the same process as I mentioned earlier. Ah, looks much better now. I am spraying it with some RO water just to get any unwanted chemicals off of it. Wow, looks very wet. But now we can start the... This terrarium came with a mesh top, which I already have some Mist King nozzles attached to it. I simply poked a hole through the mesh using scissors and attached the nozzles. And I am currently using 4 of them. I am using the Mist King to mist the Vivarium automatically, because I am not doing that by myself. This is a high humidity vivarium, so it is much easier to just have an automatic misting system set up. A humidifier can also be used for this purpose, but they are not as good. They are more just for the cool fog effect. Make sure you lock it in. You don't want your creature to escape now, do you?
Bring me that.
Get off! Might as well add the light now so you guys can see what I'm doing better. Lovely. Under the stand I'll have this big container which will house the Mist King, the humidifier, and other fun stuff. For the Mist King, it needs to be connected to some kind of a water source. So I need to connect it to the water container. Remember to use clean, safe water like RO water. So I marked the spot and drilled the hole. Oh, looks like the hole was too small, so I made it bigger. But then I realized that I can't actually attach the nut to the bolt because my hand is far too big. You dummy, you should have realized that so much earlier. Yeah, better late than never, right? So I cut off the top. It works. For the humidifier, I first need to get the siphon tube typically made for aquariums. I cut off the big plastic tube section because you won't be needing it. And also I got this thing. This is where the fog is going to be coming out from. I did some stuff to it that doesn't actually end up working, so just ignore all that. This is the humidifier that I'm going to be using. It is a cool mist humidifier. Remember, for reptiles and vivariums, you want to get a cool mist humidifier. Cool mist. I also removed this part of the humidifier so I can attach the siphon to it. Using some aquarium safe silicone, I attached the siphon pipe to the humidifier. This will allow the fog to travel all the way up to the vivarium. Now just to add them all to the container. Might as well add the fans now. The fans are used to create airflow and ventilation in the vivarium. This is important to stop air from becoming too stagnant in the vivarium, or to stop the vivarium from becoming too humid. Right, gotta put the container under the stand now. On the power bar, I added the necessary timers for the lights and the humidifier. The lights are on for 12 hours per day and the humidifier runs for 15-minute segments throughout the day. I tried to velcro the power bar to the side of the container, but it did not end up working. So I added it to the top of the container. Just make sure it's not on the floor, because if there's ever a leak, then... Oh yeah, and for the fans, it turns out the cord from the fans is way too small, so I have the power bar with a timer set up on the back of the vivarium. Yeah, this sucks, and I end up changing it later anyway, so just ignore this. So this is where the fog will come out from. Gotta attach it to the humidifier. Also gotta connect the mist king to the nozzles, which are on the mesh. Also the fans work. So that's nice. The humidifier is working, and the Mist King is working. Terrific. And good thing they work too, cause those stuff ain't cheap. Now we are done with the equipment side of things and we can focus on the substrate. First will be the drainage layer. That will be made up of these hydro balls, which I have sitting in water because these things actually expand when they absorb water. And they also come from a previous display, that's why they are so dirty. Before we add them in, this is where this weird half PVC pipe with holes at the bottom comes in. Remember it? You see, a drainage layer is a way to keep the soil from sitting in too much water after misting, letting the water fall into the drainage layer, which stops the soil from becoming a swamp. Because if the soil is way too wet, it is not good for plants or reptiles. And also, if you mist heavily, this layer will eventually have too much water and the water will get into the soil. So it is important to remove this water. This is where the pipe becomes very useful. It allows me to use a small pipe to drain the water away from this layer without having to disturb the soil. I know what you're thinking. Wow, this is a really smart solution, isn't it? No, you want to add about 2 inches of these hydro balls or clay balls, whatever you want to call them. This is where you add the drainage mesh to separate the soil from the drainage layer. For the substrate, I use a mix of a whole bunch of stuff. Some Josh's Frogs biomix, some Reptisoil, some sphagnum moss, some fluval stratum, and some black sand. Now I just mix it all in a bucket. Just to let you know, the Josh's Frogs biomix creates a lot of dust. Like, a lot. Pretty sure I got some pieces of dirt in my nose after mixing this. I added about 2.5 inches of soil. Depending on how many ground plants you plan on having, you may want to have more or less soil. I honestly really like the look of this substrate mixture. Doesn't it just look awesome? Misting the tank just to get all the soil nice and wet for the plants. Next up is this layer of sphagnum moss. You probably don't need to do this part unless you struggle to hold humidity. The reason why I added this layer is because the lizard I am planning to get for this vivarium likes to bury itself in sphagnum moss. And to top it off, some leaf litter. The vivarium's looking better each second. Now we can finally move on to the last section. This is a tall vivarium and will mostly focus on tropical epiphytic plants. Plants that don't need soil and can grow on other things like pieces of wood. The first batch of plants are these nice Neurogelia bromeliads. The best kind of bromeliads. And bromeliads are one of my favorite type of plants. And this plant is also a plant that my mystery lizard loves to live in. In order to mount the bromeliads, I first need to find a nice place for them. Then I added some super glue to the dead base of the stump and put it in its spot. Then I added some sphagnum moss to the base of the plant to help the roots grow. Looks nice, doesn't it? Next are these air plants, which I simply glued into place. The next batch of plants I got from someone locally, which include moss, microgramma, hupersia, and some philodendrons. For these plants, I mostly just put some wet sphagnum moss in the desired location and shove the plants in there. Sometimes I use a non-rust bendy wire to help hold the plants. This bendy wire came with the plants. For the moss, I just placed it where I wanted. I actually changed the location of the hupersia. Well, I changed it again. I mean, that spot looks like it was made for this plant, doesn't it? Man, the vivarium looks so much nicer with plants. Oh yeah, just a note, I tried different methods to keep this humidifier nozzle thing to stay in place so that the fog will go into the vivarium. But none of my methods seems to work. Until I simply used this stainless steel wire to wrap around it, and it seems to work. There is one thing that I am not quite happy with, and it's with the branches. I want to get that cool cloud forest look, where the branches are completely covered with plants and moss. But I don't know how to achieve this. The branches dry up too fast, which means there's not enough moisture for those plants. But luckily, while I was at an expo, Understory Enterprises gave me some great advice.
Give up!
Just kidding, they taught me their technique to get this cool cloud forest effect. So what they did was basically, they got some sphagnum moss and used some string to attach them to a piece of wood. Then you can attach the moss/plants to the sphagnum. Which works really well because the sphagnum holds water much better than the wood, which keeps the plants nice and moist. So I wrapped this sphagnum to all the branches where I wanted to get this effect. I really like the look even without the plants. The next plant is this nice big Anthurium crystallinum. Very cool plant. The next batch of plants includes some Anthurium, microgramma, moss, philodendron, and a really nice looking bromeliad. I realized that there isn't actually any room left for the bromeliad on any of the branches. It's a bit too big. So I decided to actually have it on the bottom. So I attached it to a piece of wood and placed it on the substrate. Now for this Anthurium veitchi, also known as the King Anthurium. And you can't have a king without a queen, hint hint. For the plants or moss that will go on the branches, I simply attach them the same way I attach the sphagnum moss. And the moss will eventually grow over the string, so the string that you use to attach them won't become visible. Also, just to note, large reptiles will probably damage these plants, so be warned. It may not look too impressive now, but just you wait until everything has fully grown in. Then I added some more air plants. Looks really nice. I am very happy with the look.
I'm going to find you.
Alright, so it's actually been a while since I added the plants. As you can see, the plants are growing very well. Some better than others. But before I continue with this update, I think this is a great opportunity to show you guys how this blue tube thing works. Remember it? If you were to look at the soil, you may notice that it looks very wet, doesn't it? Well, I may or may not have been paying attention to where the water level is, like, oh my god. Well, good thing I don't have any terrestrial plants. So I need to get this nice little tubing and stick it into the blue PVC. Then I create a siphon to get the water out. You can create a siphon by sucking the air out of the tube. Yeah, and eventually the tube will drain the water out. Wow, that looks very not clean. I am definitely adjusting the misting after that to mist a bit less water because clearly I have been misting too much. Now I just covered the tube with some sphagnum moss because the blue really does stand out. That's why you should have used a less vibrant PVC tube, you. Back to the vivarium. I have no idea what this plant is. It literally came out of nowhere. The vivarium overall looks really nice. The humidifier is working well, the air plants are doing well, the bromeliads are doing well, and the moss has grown on the branches just like how I wanted them to. Some of the plants did lose their leaves, but are now starting to grow new ones in. I am just overall very happy with the vivarium. But just like I mentioned earlier, you can't have a king anthurium without a queen anthurium. This is a beautiful anthurium. Oh boy. Warraquanum? I think I said that right. Warraquanum. And this is also the narrow dark variety, which in my opinion is the prettiest Warraquanum. Now just to find a place for it, where it'll actually fit, huh? I ended up putting it there next to the baby bromeliad. I basically wrapped a string around it and the branch next to it, just like I did with the sphagnum moss earlier. This is really the only spot where it would fit. Also, while keeping a vivarium, you're probably gonna have to take care of some of the plants. So I ended up removing the air plant that wasn't doing so well. I trimmed some of the philodendrons that were getting way too long, and even planted some of the pieces in other locations. Unfortunately, the Eupersia isn't doing as well as I would have hoped, so I just gotta adjust it and hope for the best. I also ended up getting some new air plants and mounted them the same way I mounted the previous ones. Man, the vivarium looks better every day.
You can't hide forever!
Now would you look at that? The queen anthurium grew in a new leaf. A very big new leaf. I have also gotten something I probably should have gotten a long time ago. Some cleanup crew, like these springtails, specifically this species. I was told they do well in high humidity. You can also see a lot of them running around. I also got some isopods, some dwarf purple isopods. Isopods that also do well in high humidity. But why didn't you get the dwarf white isopods? That is what everyone gets, you... Well, you see, dwarf whites and dwarf purples are very similar, except that dwarf whites can reproduce through, I believe it's called parthenogenesis, where a single isopod can produce babies without mating. And I heard stories of these things taking over a tank, because they reproduce so quickly. Will this happen to you? Probably not, but in fear of that happening, I got these dwarf purple isopods, who reproduce a lot slower, and they reproduce sexually, so you need to have at least 2 for them to reproduce, and they are much less likely to take over a vivarium. To add the springtails, there are basically 2 different methods. One method is basically to dig a hole and dump some of the charcoal from the springtail cup into it. and hopefully getting some springtails in the process, because they really like being on charcoal. And then you just bury the charcoal up. The other method, which I think is a lot more effective, is to pour some RO water into the springtail cup. As you can see, the springtails float to the top of the water, and then you just pour the water into the substrate. Looks like I'm pouring some charcoal in as well. Oh well. I'll bury it later. You can see all the little springtails running around. Then you just continue pouring until you got all or almost all the springtails. Then you bury the charcoal up like it was never there. Now it's time for some isopods. Let's see if I can find any. Well, there should be at least 25 of them in here. Well, at least that's what it says on the label. I guess they are really small. For the isopods, it's actually very simple. You just dump everything in. It's like the only method. Let's see. Oh, there's one. That, I believe, is a adult dwarf purple isopod. They are really small. And they're not really that purple. But I guess it has some dark colorations in it. Don't forget, after you finished adding all of the substrate, you may still have some left in the cup. And you really want to double check, especially with these isopods, because they're very easy to miss. So just add them in. Cover up the evidence and you're all good. Oh yeah, quick note, for the fan I had this whole setup because the fan cord was too small, but I want to have the power bar down there where it is more convenient. So I did the only logical thing to do and I got this USB extension cord. Like, why didn't I get this earlier? You see? Look at that. This is a lot better and more convenient. Now I can actually adjust the timer. And would you look at that? The fans still work. Hooray! Well, I guess that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Now go build your own custom vivarium. If you want, I guess. See ya! I did it. I finally did it. I found them.